It's normal to want to get back at someone for doing you wrong. But what happens when that leads to an event that changes the lives of those involved for years to come? Stephen Harrison's life was a remarkable testament to the pursuit and realization of the American dream. Born into a modest middle-class family, Stephen displayed an exceptional entrepreneurial spirit from an early age. As a teenager, he took on odd jobs such as mowing lawns and delivering newspapers, diligently saving every penny he earned. His parents, impressed and proud of his industrious nature, wholeheartedly encouraged him to follow his ambitions and aim high. By the time Stephen entered college, his determination and resourcefulness had already set him apart. From the confines of his garage, he launched a small tech startup that he named Harrison Technologies. The company quickly gained traction due to Stephen's uncanny ability to identify gaps in the market and develop innovative solutions to fill them. His work ethic was unparalleled. He spent countless nights perfecting his products, pouring his heart and soul into the business. Stephen's efforts soon paid off in ways most people could only dream of. By the age of 25, he had amassed a fortune and achieved multi-millionaire status. He had everything a young man could hope for: wealth, success, and the admiration of his peers. His meteoric rise was celebrated widely, with numerous business magazines featuring him as one of the brightest minds of his generation. His groundbreaking products revolutionized the tech industry, earning him both critical acclaim and a fiercely loyal customer base. As his company flourished, Stephen expanded his team, bringing on board talented engineers and marketers who shared his ambitious vision. Together, they propelled Harrison Technologies to even greater heights. Despite his demanding schedule, Stephen managed to maintain an active social life. He frequently attended high-profile parties and charity events, rubbing shoulders with influential figures. It was at one of these glamorous events that Stephen met Janelia, a strikingly beautiful woman with an enchanting smile and an undeniable charisma that turned heads wherever she went. Stephen was captivated by her charm and was drawn to her magnetic presence. To him, Janelia seemed like the perfect partner, intelligent, elegant, and supportive of his aspirations. Their romance blossomed quickly, and Stephen, deeply enamored, spared no expense in wooing her. From extravagant gifts to luxurious vacations, he showered her with the finest that money could buy, convinced she was his soulmate. However, unknown to Stephen, Janelia was not the person she appeared to be. Beneath her glamorous exterior was a calculating woman driven by greed and a relentless hunger for wealth. Janelia had perfected the art of manipulation, using her beauty and charm to exploit wealthy men. To her, Stephen was just another conquest, a means to an end. Their seemingly perfect relationship was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. But Stephen, blinded by love, failed to notice the warning signs. He believed wholeheartedly in her affection and never suspected that she was merely waiting for an opportunity to move on to greener pastures. Janelia expertly played her role, saying all the right things and being present when Stephen needed her most. As time went on, the challenges of the highly competitive tech industry began to catch up with Stephen. Several of his ventures failed to yield the expected returns, and a series of poor investments, coupled with market fluctuations, severely impacted Harrison Technologies. For the first time in his career, Stephen faced financial instability. The immense stress of trying to save his company took a toll on him, both physically and mentally. During this trying period, Stephen turned to Janelia for emotional support. He believed that their love could withstand any adversity, but Janelia's true nature began to surface. She grew distant and irritable, openly resenting the changes in their lifestyle. The lavish dinners and exotic vacations were no longer a regular occurrence, and she was unhappy with the new reality. One fateful evening, after a particularly grueling day, Stephen returned home to find Janelia packing her bags. Panic-stricken, he pleaded with her to stay, assuring her that his financial troubles were only temporary and promising to rebuild his empire. But Janelia was unmoved. She coldly informed him that she had no intention of staying with a man who could no longer provide the life she desired. Her words cut him deeply, leaving him shattered. In a desperate attempt to make her stay, Stephen accused Genelia of being a gold digger, demanding she return the money he had spent on her. Their argument escalated into a heated exchange filled with accusations and insults. Furious, Genelia stormed out of the house, vowing to make Stephen pay for his words. Little did he know, her threat was not idle. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would change his life forever. Days later, Stephen's world came crashing down. The police arrived at his home and arrested him on charges of assault. Genelia had accused him of forcing himself on her during their argument, claiming he had refused to take no for an answer. Stephen was stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. Unbeknownst to him, Genelia had meticulously planned her revenge. She had recorded their argument and selectively edited the footage to paint Stephen as violent and abusive. Her lawyer, a cunning professional, built a compelling case against him. Despite his best efforts, Stephen had no solid evidence to prove his innocence. The trial became a media sensation, with sensational headlines tarnishing Stephen's once bright reputation. His business crumbled under the weight of the scandal, and former friends and associates distanced themselves. Alone and abandoned, Stephen was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Prison life was a living hell for Stephen, filled with anger, despair, and endless regret. Yet, amidst the hardship, he resolved to fight back. Spending countless hours in the prison library, Stephen studied law and meticulously planned his revenge on Genelia. 20 years later, a hardened and determined Stephen walked out of prison with nothing left to lose, except his burning desire for justice. Stephen's release marked the beginning of his long journey toward reclaiming his life. His wealth and reputation were gone, but his resolve had only grown stronger. Determined to expose Genelia for the fraud she was, Stephen gathered all the evidence he had painstakingly collected during his years in prison. His case was built on Genelia's own words and the edited recordings she had used to imprison him. Armed with irrefutable proof of her lies, Stephen presented his case to the courts. The truth came out, and Genelia was convicted of perjury and fraud. Her manipulation and deceit were no longer hidden, and she was sentenced to serve time for her crimes. Stephen Harrison had emerged from the depths of despair, not just with a desire for justice, but with a newfound purpose. His journey had been one of tragedy and betrayal, but it had also been one of resilience and redemption. Though he could never reclaim what had been lost, he now held a sense of triumph, one born of the strength to rise from the ashes and fight for the truth. Wouldn't you like to subscribe? While this video gets even more interesting, Stephen Harrison spent the next 5 years meticulously devising a plan, carefully biding his time as he worked out every minute detail. The life he once knew, one filled with opulence and promise, was now a distant memory. The betrayal he had suffered at Genelia's hands had shattered his world, leaving him with nothing but bitterness and a relentless hunger for retribution. Stephen's first step toward enacting his revenge was to rebuild his shattered life. He secured a job as a mechanic, utilizing his technical skills to earn a modest living. Despite the meager income, he lived frugally, saving every penny with a singular purpose in mind: funding the elaborate plan that consumed his thoughts. He maintained a low profile, deliberately avoiding any actions or interactions that could draw attention to him. The sacrifices were immense, but Stephen accepted them as necessary for the greater goal he envisioned. Every day, he would wake up, haunted by the memories of what Genelia had done to him. His pride and self-worth had been reduced to nothing, his dreams of a bright future replaced by the cold, hollow echoes of his past. Stephen believed that by taking his revenge, he could reclaim some semblance of control, restore his dignity, and heal the wounds inflicted by Genelia's betrayal. However, the longer he pursued his vendetta, the more he realized how far removed he had become from the man he once was. While reconstructing his life, Stephen kept a close eye on Genelia, the woman who had ruined him. She had remarried, tying the knot with a man named Liam. The couple resided in a comfortable suburban home, their lives seemingly idyllic. They had no children, and their daily routine was predictable and mundane. On the surface, Janelia appeared to be living a picture-perfect life. However, Stephen saw through the facade. To him, she remained the same manipulative, greedy individual who had orchestrated his downfall. The hatred he felt toward her burned brighter with each passing day, fueling his obsession with ensuring she paid for her actions. As Stephen observed her life from afar, his plan began to take form. He resolved to exact revenge by framing Janelia for Liam's murder. His goal was to ensure that she experienced the same torment, disgrace, and injustice that she had inflicted upon him. For months, Stephen devoted himself to gathering information, scrutinizing every aspect of their lives. He studied their habits and routines with precision, preparing for the moment when he would finally put his scheme into action. His meticulous nature wouldn't allow for any mistakes. Every detail had to be flawless. One fateful night, Stephen decided the time was right. He broke into their home under the cover of darkness, skillfully avoiding security cameras and disabling the alarm system. He spiked their drinks with sleeping pills, waiting patiently for the drugs to take effect. Once they were unconscious, Stephen used their fingerprints to unlock their phones. He meticulously staged a fake text message conversation, creating the illusion that Liam had been unfaithful to Janelia. The fabrication was an essential piece of his sinister plan. You're still here? Great! Why don't you subscribe while you enjoy this video so that you can enjoy more just like it? With a heavy heart and trembling hands, Stephen picked up a knife and approached the sleeping Liam. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered an apology to the man who had unwittingly become a pawn in his elaborate game of vengeance. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. He couldn't bring himself to believe that this man, who had become the instrument of his revenge, yet he saw no other way. With a deep breath, Stephen plunged the knife into Liam's chest, ending his life in a gruesome act of retribution. He then carefully placed the knife in Janelia's hand, arranging the crime scene to resemble a violent domestic dispute. As he left the scene, his heart pounded, not from adrenaline, but from the overwhelming wave of regret and despair. His mind raced, questioning whether the price of his revenge was too high. The thought of Liam's lifeless body haunted him, and the tears he had shed during the act didn't abate the growing void inside him. Stephen's work complete, he fled the country, using the savings he had amassed over the years. The following morning, the police arrived at the suburban home to find Liam's lifeless body and Janelia unconscious beside him. The scene pointed to an open and shut case of domestic violence turned deadly. Janelia was arrested, charged with Liam's murder, and faced the prospect of spending the rest of her life behind bars. Despite her vehement protests of innocence and her insistence that Stephen had framed her, she lacked the evidence to substantiate her claims, just as Stephen had been unable to prove his own innocence years before. As Stephen began his new life in a foreign country, far from the reach of American law enforcement, he adopted the alias Daniel Roberts. He found work as a mechanic in a small town, continuing to use his technical skills to make a modest living. He rented a small, unassuming apartment and lived a solitary, frugal existence, ever cautious to avoid drawing attention to himself. Yet, despite his newfound freedom, Stephen was haunted by the events of his past. The memory of Liam's lifeless body and the sound of Janelia's cries of despair lingered in his mind, tormenting him. What he had once envisioned as the ultimate satisfaction of revenge had turned out to be hollow and fleeting. Stephen's guilt grew heavier with each passing year. The man he had been, one who had once believed in justice and fairness, was gone, replaced by a shadow of his former self. He had achieved his goal, but at the cost of his soul. The satisfaction he had sought was eclipsed by a deep sense of emptiness and regret. His hands, which had once been steady, now trembled at the thought of his actions. Stephen withdrew from social interactions, isolating himself and avoiding any meaningful connections. His co-workers noticed his increasingly somber demeanor, but he brushed off their concerns with feigned excuses about work stress. Time passed, but the weight of his choices never lifted. The echoes of his decision haunted him, his reflection in the mirror a constant reminder of the man he had become. He knew that no amount of isolation or quiet would erase what had happened. He had become a prisoner of his own making, burdened by guilt that grew heavier with each passing year. Meanwhile, Hanelia's trial became a media sensation. The courtroom was filled with journalists and onlookers eager to witness the dramatic downfall of a woman who had once lived a life of privilege and luxury. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence against her: the fabricated text messages, her fingerprints on the murder weapon, and the staged crime scene. Despite her lawyer's best efforts, the defense could not overcome the overwhelming case against her. Janelia maintained her innocence, desperately trying to explain Stephen's motive for framing her. However, her claims fell on deaf ears. Her history of deceit and her previous false accusations against Stephen only served to undermine her credibility. The jury deliberated briefly before delivering a guilty verdict. Janelia was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, condemned to live out her days in a cell for a crime she did not commit. The media pounced on her story, casting Janelia as a woman who had once lived a life of privilege reduced to a convicted criminal. Yet, despite her protests, her cries for justice were drowned out by the overwhelming tide of evidence against her. The once perfect life she had tried to preserve was reduced to a narrative of betrayal and downfall. The story of Stephen Harrison and Janelia became a cautionary tale, a symbol of the devastating interplay between justice and vengeance. It exposed the flaws of the legal system, the destructive power of false accusations, and the corrosive effects of revenge. In the end, both Stephen and Janelia were victims of their own choices. Stephen's insatiable thirst for retribution had transformed him into the very monster he sought to destroy, while Janelia's greed and manipulation had led to her ultimate downfall. Their tragic story served as a reminder of the destructive power of lies and the futility of revenge. It underscored the importance of compassion and the need for justice to be tempered with understanding and humanity. In their pursuit of vengeance and self-interest, Stephen and Janelia had both lost everything, leaving a legacy of pain and regret that would endure long after they were gone. Please like, share, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel.